Well, welcome everybody to our webinar today on creating space for meaningful retreats online. I'm Keith Anderson. I'm the Associate for Digital Content at Lifelong Learning at Virginia Theological Seminary. And I'm joined by Catherine Malloy from Lifelong Learning at VTS. And we're delighted to have today Lindsey Baynham and Rebecca Hall, who are going to be our presenters for our webinar. We're going to have lots of opportunity for discussion and question and answers as we go along throughout the program today. So welcome, and we're glad to have you along with us, and we look forward to hearing the wisdom of our presenters as well as the wisdom of the group here that is gathered. It's great to see all the ways in which you are ministering to people around the country, maybe around the world, and how we create sacred space for folks in this unusual time. As we said, this webinar is brought to you by Lifelong Learning at Virginia Theological Seminary. And in addition to these webinars that we do every month, we also have lots of online resources for you at Building Faith at buildfaith.org, which is a great resource of practical resources for ministry leaders, particularly those in faith formation, as well as our eFormation digital ministry tools. We've all had to become digital ministers in these last several months. So if you have questions, a lot of resources on our eFormation site as well within our department, and we'd love to be of assistance to you. So welcome. And let us begin with prayer. Almighty and everlasting God, you have given the Holy Spirit to abide with us forever. Bless, we pray, with the Spirit's grace and presence, the bishops and the other clergy and the laity here, assembled in your name, that your church, being preserved in true faith and godly discipline, may fulfill the mind of the one who loved it and gave himself for it, your Son, Jesus Christ, our Savior, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. All right. And let me introduce our presenters today. Again, I'm Keith Anderson with the beard, with the COVID beard. And I'm kind of hosting the webinar today, and I'm delighted to introduce our panelist. The Reverend Lindsey Baynham is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church and serves in the Virginia Conference. And she has served in the local church, campus ministry, and now as the director in the Center for Clergy Excellence, where her work supports the identification as well as the development of clergy leaders. Lindsey's passionate about worship design, connecting folks in light of their gifts, and preaching and teaching. And we're also joined by Rebecca Hall, and Rebecca serves on the staff at St. David's in Austin, Texas, and has served there since 2007. She has a master's in spiritual formation from the Seminary of the Southwest, and her particular areas of interest are in vocation and discernment, Benedictine and Ignatian spiritualities and practices, Christian discipleship, and contemplative practices. Rebecca practices spiritual direction with groups and individuals and leads retreats. And she also periodically consults with other churches on how to integrate small group ministry and other adult formation programs in the life of Episcopal parishes. And in addition to serving at St. David's, Rebecca also works for the Iona Center at the Seminary of the Southwest as the Director of Spiritual Formation. So welcome, Lindsey and Rebecca. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what to expect in our webinar today? Rebecca is going to present first, and then we're going to pause for questions. You don't need to hold your questions. As questions come to you during the webinar, please let us know. The best way for us to get your questions is using the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can put questions in the chat, but there's a lot going on in the chat. That's a much better space for kind of conversation and discussion. It's easier for us to identify questions if they're in the Q&A. So please go ahead and do that. And you can do that at any time for either of our presenters. And when we pause for questions after Rebecca presents and then after Lindsey presents, we'll have an opportunity to respond to those. So just put them up there at any point, and we'll get to them. And look forward to great presentations as well as great conversation and discussion and idea sharing today. And at the end, we'll have the time for tools and resources that we've identified. So why are we doing this webinar? I just said a little earlier, for many of us, retreats are a normal part of what we do in the life of the church, whether it's in a parish or in a diocesan setting or in some other way. And due to COVID-19, we've had to rethink a lot of our plans. My congregation, I would normally be away on our men's retreat this coming weekend for 3 days, and that's not happening. So we're doing a men's retreat evening on Sunday night. So we're all finding different ways to make the space for people in the ways that we can. So we have this opportunity and limitations when it comes to doing retreats in this season of ministry. Digital tools are more advanced and more personal than ever before, which is great. But of course, not everything transmits online as well as it does in person. So we're gonna be sharing lots of ideas about how we make this ministry work in this time. And Rebecca is gonna kick us off. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. And thanks for the opportunity for getting to talk to you about retreats. It's something that I've led a lot of retreats, and since COVID, I've had an opportunity to get to try to lead retreats online. So I'm just going to share a few of the tips that I've learned. I don't claim to be an expert in this, just have a little bit of experience, and I look forward to hearing what other people's experience is so that I can learn with you. So here are some of my tips, and they might seem, some of them might be obvious, but I think it's always good for us to restate the obvious, lest we forget. So the first thing is that when we want to create retreats, we want to create a safe and restful space. And we want to do that online, just like we want to do that in person. And my presentation is going to focus more on the structure of retreats and less on content, because I think that the structure of retreats is what helps us make something a restful and safe space. Content is what comes later, and a lot of people love to think about the content, but thinking about the structure first will help you have a successful retreat. So the first thing is to know your audience. And that may seem obvious, but think about, especially during this time of COVID, who do you think is going to come to your retreat, and what do they need? So I often offer contemplative retreats, and most of the people that come to my contemplative retreats are older. Most of them are empty nesters or older than empty nesters. But right now, those are the people that are living alone. And so the people that are living alone don't need more time alone. They need more time to connect. And these are the people that I see as desperate to connect. So when I plan my retreat, I plan a lot. Even if I call it a contemplative retreat, when I see the people that have signed up, I know who needs rest, but who also needs connection. So making sure that you structure your retreat for the people that are going to be there. At this time, the people who are desperate for time alone are parents, right? Parents of small children. These are not usually the people that come to a contemplative retreat. They don't usually have time. But if I were going to design a retreat right now, I might want to design a quiet, contemplative space with lots of silence for moms or dads who are doing online school all week. They might be the ones that really need this, where the empty nesters who normally do contemplative retreats are really going to want to chit chat and be more noisy. So just keep your audience in mind and what they're actually going through now when you think about what to offer. Align the structure of retreat according to the type of retreat. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a few different types of retreats that I offer more a little later, but contemplative retreats are just one type. There's also workshops, there are teaching retreats. I know Lindsey's going to present something on one of her retreats that, so every structure is going to depending on the type of retreat, you're going to want to structure your time differently. For this time during the pandemic, instead of translating in-person retreat structures, I like just taking what you would do in person and putting it on Zoom. Try to think creatively and plan a new structure that will work better in a virtual world. I think that when we, back in March, when we all went online, we did just translate exactly what did we used to do, and let's just do it on Zoom, or let's just do it on Facebook Live. But instead of doing that, we really have to ask what works in a virtual world, and we have to be really creative with what with the structure, and not just take exactly what we used to do and just do it on Zoom. Overall, everything should be a lot shorter. I used to, if you have a retreat that you used to do on a Friday night and a Saturday, you might only, like Keith is doing his 3-day retreat on a Sunday evening. That's an example of just adapting to the time, because people just can't spend all that time on Zoom. Consider your limitations as well as your assets. Depending on where you are, you might be able to have smaller in-person retreats. You might be able to have some hybrid retreats where you do some part of it virtually, but some part of it in person. Some of us are in places where we're completely shut down still. I'm in Austin, and we're not permitted to go to our buildings, but some places in more rural areas are able to do more of a hybrid. And consider if you can offer your materials in a class or in a group over the course of several weeks instead of an intensive retreat. This is something that I've started doing. Some of the retreats that I would have offered as day-long retreats, instead I'm offering them as, I still call them a retreat, but I'm doing it like on 3 Saturday mornings, for example, and I'm doing it an hour for 3 Saturday mornings. Because just being all day on Zoom is really exhausting for people. I think I'm ready for the next slide, Keith, thanks. I encourage people to use what's called flipped learning approach whenever possible, even when the retreat isn't about learning. And flipped learning is just a fancy way of saying, do all the teaching beforehand, either in reading materials or in videos. So if you're going to, for example, if you would at your retreat have a speaker, a guest speaker, like an expert, come and lead the retreat, and they would do some sort of teaching, and then small groups, and then teaching in small groups and stuff like that, consider video recording those teaching parts and having people watch them before the gathering, or and use all the time that you are on Zoom for conversation and integration of material. So carefully consider what must take place synchronously. That means when you're on Zoom together talking, and what can be asynchronous. And asynchronous is what people do when they're not on Zoom, reading, watching something on YouTube, anything like that. Give handouts in advance and ask people to print them. That's it. Just have people come prepared, and then maximize the conversation and discussion on Zoom to integrate the material and share. So make sure that the time that you are on Zoom is going to be for people to be in discussion with each other. What I've really found is that the time when Zoom is so exhausting is when we're in large groups of people listening to a presentation, kind of like you are right now, and you don't get a chance to talk to each other about it. When Zoom is not as exhausting is when you're in breakout rooms and when you're getting to actually share ideas back and forth and be very participatory. So minimize the amount of time that people are not participating actively, and maximize the time that people are actively participating. So here's 3 different examples of types of, this is not an exhaustive list of types of retreats. These are just some that I use: contemplative or spiritual retreats, workshop retreats, and fellowship with a topic or a teaching retreat, for example. We'll go to the next slide. So I'm giving you a few examples of how I might structure a retreat. This is one that I'm planning for a grief work retreat. And it's going to be using centering prayer and journaling as spiritual practice tools for healing. Now, this is going to be for people who have lost a loved one 2 years ago or before. So not somebody who's in crisis right now, but this is for people who in the church who have in the past lost people. Here's a quick tip. If my retreat starts at 9, I tell everybody I'm going to open the Zoom room at 8:45 for chit-chatting and for tech support. That way you don't start at 9 o'clock with people who can't get on Zoom, who can't mute themselves, who can't get their video going, all that stuff. So I make myself available for tech support early, and also just letting people catch up. So then I have the introductions and the breakout room, and a retreat this short, I would aim for 45 minutes off Zoom and the rest of the time on Zoom. But you'll see that I have some time when people are in breakout rooms and some time when we're doing spiritual practice together. So, and I kind of use this, I always, on all my retreats, I have a format that becomes familiar to the participants. We do, something in a big group, then a breakout room, and then we're off Zoom, and then something in a big group, and then off Zoom, breakout room, so that people become familiar with the pattern. The structure becomes something comforting and lets them rest into it. I think I'm ready for the next slide. So here's another one that I do. It's a rule of life retreat. And this one this is my actual outline for myself, what I do. I give people readings to do in advance, and we watch some videos as a big group, but these videos are from SSJE and they're only 2 minutes long. So I just share my screen, we watch the video, we discuss it. I give them time apart. So we get on Zoom to do a little bit of learning, then we get off Zoom to do reflection. On Zoom to do a little bit of learning and discussion, off Zoom to do reflection. And at the end of the time, they walk away with a rule of life. So for topic retreats, I think at the beginning I might have called them like fellowship retreats or something. But this is more for like when you have like an expert or somebody who's going to come in, maybe it's you, maybe you're the expert that you're going to be leading the retreat and doing some teaching on it. This is that type of retreat. So if you're going to be doing some teaching, like I said before, I encourage you to consider pre-recording all your teaching so that people can watch that off Zoom and not have that time that would be spent learning, using that time for Zoom time. So try not to do that. Videos should be 15 minutes or shorter. You don't want there to be too much. Time on Zoom is for discussion and sharing, not for hearing a lecture. I think that it's just really hard for people to hear a lecture and then have to switch over and do conversation. I use breakout rooms really liberally. I have found that when I'm participating in things, the times when I feel energized after a Zoom meeting are the times when I've gotten to actually talk to 3 or 4 other people in a breakout room. And I just know from the feedback that I've gotten when I've used them, the breakout rooms are people's favorite thing. Even if you have a small retreat, like 8 people, you can still put them in pairs, and that will help. And also, like you've seen in my things, bounce on and off Zoom using a series of pre-planned exercises. So here's the next slide is just an example of how I might do a vocation and discernment retreat. and I didn't have times on this one, but I would use a combination of large group activities like doing Lectio, breakout rooms. If it's going to be this might be a longer retreat. Like I said it was 6 hours. I would aim for no more than 4 hours on Zoom. I mean, I think 4 hours on Zoom in one day is a lot to ask of people. So, but this is if you can't get away with structuring your retreat in another time frame. Like, for example, I might, if I could do this, I might try to do it over a series of Wednesday nights or Saturday mornings. I might, but sometimes you just have to do something in one day. So when you have to do something in one day, there are ways to do it so that it's less exhausting for people. And I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. We do have some questions for you, and a few people had questions about when you're talking about being on and off Zoom. What is the logistics? Are they just muted with video off, or do they log off and then come back in?
You can do it either way. I think that it's fine just to have people mute and turn their video off. That's what I suggest to people. That way they don't lose the link, or there's, so that's what I've done, is just have people mute and turn their video off, but you could have them actually log off.
Great. And Marianne asks, has anyone done a Zoom retreat for sessions or councils? And this, we may be anticipating some of what Lindsey's going to share, but she says, my session has been working really hard and I'd like to do a pastoral retreat for them.
Yeah.
Or imagine the same type of kind of a approach could apply.
Yeah, I think that, you could pick a structure that you think would be restful for them. If they've been working really hard, they want to rest, right? Like what do they need? And what does that mean in your context? Does that mean that they need time to be together, to reconnect with each other when they're not working? Like just to do more fellowship? Does it mean they need prayer time together? So,
just as you're saying that, it makes so much sense. When we do our retreat, there's lots of free time, that's just kind of built in, and we go away to a retreat center. And so it sort of takes care of itself. We just create the container for it on the schedule. But I can imagine one of the tendencies when you're kind of boiling a retreat down is to do so much content as opposed to, and not carving out that space for that free time. That could definitely seem like a danger of doing retreats at this, not having the downtime.
And the breakout rooms, you can mix and match the breakout rooms a bunch of different times. The other thing you could do, which I've been considering doing, is like having people in pairs get to meet up with one another at outside to do something, like have like a meeting, like a Zoom meeting at the beginning, and give a lot of exercises for people to go off, but have them meet a partner to do a little bit in person, and then come back, the whole group come back online. So trying to figure out how to do these combo things that are both safe but also restful, and give people what they need, which is connection.
Mm-hmm. Some questions on the logistics of hosting Zoom retreats in terms of breakout rooms, and you had just said somebody has kind of a very particular question on how it's done, but you had said on breakout rooms you mix up the breakout rooms throughout a retreat experience.
Yeah, so Zoom, you can go into your settings before you set up the meeting and make sure that you have breakout rooms enabled. And then once your meeting has started, you click the breakout room button, which is on the bottom next to participants and chat and share screen on that toolbar. And then it asks you if you want to manually put people in rooms, or if you want Zoom to do it for you. And depending on how big the retreat is and what it's about, I usually just let Zoom do it, but if there's a reason to choose, you can always go and do that. And you can move people around just by dragging their name. So Zoom makes it pretty easy. I always like to practice with friends before I do any of these things on a retreat.
Yes.
So I'll take like my Zoom happy hour, and I'm like, all right, y'all, I'm going to put you in breakout rooms and see how this works. I make my family and friends be my Zoom guinea pigs. So I encourage you, if you don't feel comfortable with the Zoom features, practice on your family and friends.
I love
It'll
it.
give you confidence.
Somebody had a question about chat functions. Are chat functions distracting or helpful during a retreat? Do you disable them or let them go?
I think it would depend on the retreat. I tend to like them. I like Zoom. I like chatting functions. But if people are meditating, they're not going to be chatting. So, or if they're doing something, if they're doing some sort of journaling exercise, it's usually I've never seen people use chat. Well, I should say, I've very rarely seen people use chat inappropriately.
Okay. And final question for now, and then we're gonna come to Lindsey, but Bill says, I've had trouble with introverts leaving the class when we create breakout rooms. Any ideas?
I haven't had that trouble, so I don't know. I usually think that introverts some introverts, I should say. Some introverts like breakout rooms because they don't like to talk in front of the big group, Yeah. So I think it could go either way. If you're an extreme introvert, I'm not sure there's anything you're going to get, any way you're going to get to I always tell people, if you are not comfortable putting your video on, it's okay to keep it off. It's okay to keep yourself muted. So I just meet people where they are with that. I don't try to force them out of their shell.
Great. Thank you. Great questions, great responses. Thank you. All right, and we're going to move to Lindsey, and now for the second part of our presentation.
Awesome. Well, thank you to Keith and Catherine for having me, and to Rebecca. It's great to lead with you. I've already jotted down lots of notes, and so it's great to learn with you and with everyone who's with us this afternoon. I do a lot of events for folks that are becoming United Methodist clergy or are already clergy, and these events are already hybrid in nature. And hybrid meaning that they balance between a retreat, and so all the kinds of things that we've heard from Rebecca, and a continuing education event. We really lean into that teaching piece, and so we seek to hold the tension between these two distinct types of events, and so we can offer space for reflection and renewal, but also learning and ongoing development. So I want to share some learnings from myself and from our team around specific events and kind of creating these meaningful spaces in this season of ministry. So the first thing I would say is the assessment phase. Ask all the questions. No doubt some of you have already led virtual retreats or ministry retreats, and or maybe some of you had to cancel some things early on, and so you're looking for ways to ease back in and offer them. And so I say the first thing is to ask all the questions. What can easily move online? And I agree with Rebecca, naming the obvious is a great place to start, because it is not a one-to-one transition from in-person to online. So what can easily move to an online platform? What components of the retreat or the event are non-negotiable? What are those things that are just core to what you're offering and to the integrity of the event? Is that small group interaction? Is that a plenary speaker? Is that covenant group time? Is that teaching time? What are those non-negotiable pieces? And then what might be lost? I think, especially early on in COVID, and as we've kind of moved along, we need to create space for that grieving of what might be lost. Of course, that in-person piece is first on the list, but what might be lost as we transition events to online? And there are many more questions, but really entering into that assessment phase as you're starting to design and plan the event. And so then comes the necessary shifting or adaptability, you might call it that too. So bringing in the committee or the design team at this 30,000 foot view, and to Rebecca's point of kind of crafting the structure before you really get to some of the into the weeds of the content. And yeah, this time is all about adaptability and all hands on deck. One event that we lead happens twice a year, and it's for a group of folks who are moving towards ordination. And we realized that we took for granted that a plenary speaker or a keynote speaker came in and the team was present at the in-person event, but they really kind of sat back and participated. We realized we took that for granted and we were underutilizing our team. And so in April, which was kind of our first virtual event in COVID, and mercy, we learned a lot. So I'll talk about that event a lot. But we used our team members more and in different ways, and they led certain sections. They had more coordination and planning with the keynote presenter, and it allowed for more team engagement for the folks who were on the planning side, but also knew at a deeper level kind of the inner workings of the event. And so I think that's a practice that we will definitely live into more as time goes on. So once the event schedule is kind of formulated, I'll get a little bit into the weeds of planning, but Rebecca's information and sharing is so helpful in that regard. So event schedule is kind of formulated, tech prep. Zoom has been our platform of choice, and I'm with you, Rebecca. Call on your family and friends to practice and familiarize yourself. Breakouts are one of my favorite features of Zoom, and I feel like you can't go wrong with them. And so this allows for, as has already been shared, this small group conversation, but really think about that moment when you're teaching or presenting or facilitating and you say, okay, now look around your tables. That's what the breakout room is. You kind of tee them up and you can send them out to be in that conversation together. And yeah, just have fun with the breakouts, do them randomly, pre-assign them, move folks around. I think that that's just a really big asset to Zoom in particular. It also breaks up a long day, which leads to, you can go ahead, Catherine, to the next slide, leads to length of time. It should be shorter. This is one of my biggest learnings from that event, like I shared in April. It was too long and people were miserable. The team was miserable. The participants were miserable. I saw some are on the call today so they can come to testify that it was too long. It was miserable. And so that was one of our biggest takeaways, maybe halfway in. They need to be shorter. And so we applied that learning to a different event, but the next one we had, which was traditionally a 2-day event, and leadership scrapped the content, reworked it, and made it into 4 mini sessions over time. And so it still allowed for this particular group, those who are being ordained, to celebrate this new season in ministry, but also to spread it out over the spring and to focus on what adaptive leadership looked like. They were experiencing it and reflecting on it at the same time. And it just helped folks kind of grieve what was supposed to be, but also have more time and more focused time together. So the length of time is so important, so important. And lastly, I just want to talk about some odds and ends here of just things we've learned and things that I think might be helpful to consider as you're planning. The first being hospitality. Online retreat space requires more intentionality on how we welcome one another into the space. And, you know, in this season, we are claiming virtual space as holy ground and holy space. And so finding ways, like I said, to break people into groups or to open the Zoom early for that connection time, or that I say it's the coffee time. People come early to get their coffee and get settled. So opening the space early for that and being intentional about that, and not being afraid of chit chat as folks are coming in. I like to keep the doorbell feature on until we start, because that lets me know when someone enters the room. And so it's not putting people on the spot, but it's saying, hey, Keith, welcome. Rebecca, good to see you. So don't be afraid of that chit chat, because you would do that at the door or at the registration table or into the worship space. You would be welcoming one another into the space. That was a great question about the chat feature distracting or no. I leave it on. I even allow people to chat privately. They may not know this, but I get a transcript of all those chats. But but I allow people to chat. I mean, say what you need to say, do what you need to do. And because they would be texting each other anyways, or whispering in their groups. And so I think that is a part of the formation experience as well. And, you know, it's just this time really highlights our created nature, and that we were created to be in relationship. And a big part of that is being together in person in community. And so, yeah, we just need to be mindful of how we're connecting with one another and how we're creating that space. Think about pre-event ideas. Maybe you were just sending the agenda and what time to be there. So maybe taking some time to say, okay, all the handouts are going ahead of time. Maybe there's a teaser video from the keynote speaker. And our team is already thinking about a discernment kit for one of our events for folks who are just starting out, thinking about ministry, and to welcome them and to get them excited for the event itself. And Rebecca touched on this as well in terms of Zoom on, Zoom off, but creating space away for participants, away from the Zoom, away from the screen. That April event I told you about, we got a chance to do it again in July with the same group of people. And so we applied a lot of that learning in July, and the retreat was around spiritual renewal and formation. And so we carved out a really long lunch break, and we carved out time for people to go and journal and nap and do what they needed to do, be outside, things like that. And we just found like that allowed people to come back and be connected, or come back and be in a small group. And so there is that variedness, and which leads to my last point. Mix up your presentation styles. Don't be afraid to mix it up. Catherine, would you go to the next slide? This is our, what we call summit, but it's for folks who are discerning a call to ministry early on in the process. And so you'll see that we either had live or we had videos. And if we had a video that we were showing, the presenter then came live for Q&A. And so that mixing up broke it up. And actually, for what was traditionally a 2-day event, really condensed it. And this is you'll see this is a longer day, but we were taking kind of 2 full days and trying to, but we're already learning for the next one coming up. But yeah, I would say mix it up. And then you have, when you record videos of this content, then you have great resources for your online presence, for sharing, for future teaching. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Great, thank you. Carol asked, in terms of the chats, should people be told that private chats are not fully private? So if transcript exists, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so, and I don't know if it's, again, I don't know if it's our contract with Zoom, but we get a recording and like a transcript of the chats. And I think people know that by now, but it's worth stating like, hey, you know, if you need to send something privately, I leave it in case they need to tell their mentor something, or if they need to contact me directly. But I don't think it hurts to say, hey, just so you know, and I delete it, I don't read it or anything, but it's worth being transparent.
Yeah, and Carol just said, is it standard that you get the chat material later? And there were some questions about recording. So you can do settings in Zoom where you can record video as well as an audio file, as well as save the chat. So when we were doing our worship on Zoom webinars, we would get all three of the recordings, use the audio one to pull out for the podcast for the sermon.
Cool.
And then I would go back in the chat for the webinar because that's where people would put their prayer requests. And I could grab the chat transcript and then use that to follow up with people after church.
Right.
So
yeah,
you can use some of the recordings.
Yeah, if you record, you get all of those things. And we like to definitely record our keynote or plenary sessions. The breakout groups tend to be more confidential, so those obviously are not recorded when you send people into breakout rooms.
And just a little helpful hint for folks that because we're doing so much online, just capture as much material as you can when you're doing these programs, because you wind up having a really nice library of resources later on. Some of the stuff that we've been hosting, we've tried to record and put on YouTube, put on our website. So we have like a little library, you know, if people miss it or want to go back, or they're just trying to see what we're about. Yeah. Yeah. I would love to hear a little bit and from each of you on, you know, as a host, maybe I'm asking selfishly, but when you're hosting an event and Lindsey, you talked about hospitality, what kind of goes through your mind when you're hosting a retreat, you're hosting a meeting, like, how do you kind of, I think the people who are on this call with us, we're people who are responsible for hosting those kinds of things. We're growing into it. What are the kinds of things you keep in mind as a host when you're hosting something like this?
I think it's good to know who's on first and who's on second. So oftentimes I am the host of the Zoom, and so therefore in charge of breakouts. But if I'm not, knowing who is doing that. And oftentimes as people are coming in, I'm monitoring that. And so I am the person, the usher, whatever, at the front door saying, welcome, like, good to see you. But, you know, so kind of modeling that, hey, we can be talking. Because I think people's Zoom etiquette is so strong now that they'll come on and they'll instantly mute. And I think part of what's lost and what I grieve is that coffee time, is that coming through the door time. So I try to be mindful of, okay, do I have anything that I need to be focused on? No. Well, then I can be the greeter. If I'm setting up breakout groups, though, like if we have specific groups that we want to break people out into and I'm in the zone trying to do that, making sure that there's someone else ready to do that. And then having someone monitoring the chat. I saw in the chat, how do you use it creatively? Sometimes if someone's presenting, they'll say, throw your answers in the chat. And we just kind of pause and watch that go. Similar to how you did, Keith. Where are y'all from? And we just kind of saw that come in. So the chat is definitely an asset. So those are a couple of things I'm mindful of in terms of welcoming people and as host, because you can't do all the things. So knowing who's doing what.
We've definitely found that on these webinars. It's much better when there's two of us, somebody to kind of host and chat. And so when Catherine and I, or when there are two of us, it just makes everything more manageable, and we're able to engage people better with the chat and the Q&A and provide resources in real time. So we've definitely found two is better than one. Rebecca, what about you? What are your kind of thoughts when you go into hosting?
Yeah, about hospitality. I think that having two people for any event where you're going to have more people than will fit on one screen. You know, that's sort of my rule of thumb. If I think I'm going to have more than one screen, I have a co-host. But most of the things that I do are much smaller. You know, most of my groups are 8 to 20 people. And so I don't need a co-host. but I like what Lindsey said about framing it in terms of hospitality. Like, I think opening the room early is a tip that I have found really works, because people do want to come and just chit chat. And I think that it warms them up to participating later on. You don't want them to come in and just be frozen, mute, and then all of a sudden you want them to participate, and then they have to like break out of that mode, like, so I think that, so I tell them I'm gonna open up the room 15 minutes early for chit chat, and then we're gonna start at 9 or whenever. The other thing that I do for like spiritual type retreats is, because I can't set the room to be hospitable, like I don't have a physical room to have candles in and do the lighting and make the name tags and all the things. I might give them a list of things to bring to the retreat. So bring a candle, bring your, give them a list of things, so that, and like we all show our candles, like, and tell a little story about our candle or something, so that they have the things with them that I would provide, but they have to provide them for themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Great idea.
Yeah.
Get some questions. Do you limit participation? Do you limit the participants for a retreat? Do you have kind of, sounds like you have kind of a range, Rebecca. Do you have kind of limits on how many people you can handle?
Yeah, for the discernment event I talked about, now that we're virtual, we're trying to limit that a little bit more. The other retreat that happens twice a year, those are a set group of people. So I know I'm going to have those from year to year.
Yeah, great.
I think if it's more than 10 people, it's not a retreat. It's an event.
It's an event, yeah.
Great distinction.
So
yeah, great distinction.
And I think that there are a lot of the same things apply to retreats and events, but a retreat is something where you're going to leave feeling rested.
Yeah.
And it's just harder to feel that on Zoom if it's big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. Where's the doorbell function? Lindsey, you mentioned the doorbell. Is it in the meeting settings?
It's in the participants. You click participants, and I believe it's a more options, and you can turn off the doorbell chime. So I leave it on, and then I turn it off once we're started, just because that is distracting, at least for me.
Lee just points out that on hospitality, it's a good idea to keep your eye open for latecomers, especially when if you've already broken into breakout rooms and somebody arrives and it's kind of hanging out there needing to be assigned to a room. I've had that happen before. And I didn't know the person was waiting.
Yeah, so I have traditionally taken that role of Lee. I like that, keeping the one eye open, who's coming in and letting them in, so they're kind of folding in to the prayer and into kind of that centering time. But yeah, if they've already broken out to breakout groups, to Rebecca's point earlier, it's really easy to get folks in. I appreciate how accessible Zoom is in that regard.
Yeah. Great. I think we've answered all the questions. I want to thank you both for this incredible amount of concentrated information in just this short period of time. I've learned so much. I'm so grateful. I'm going to be taking stuff back with me to my church, and I know a lot of us are. Thank you for sharing your experience and wisdom, your successes and challenges. And thank you for providing these resources. We have a number of resources that Rebecca and Lindsey have identified for us. And this video, these slides, and resources are all going to be made available to everybody. If you register for this webinar, this will be sent out to you. It will also be on Building Faith, so that you can just make your way through the slides. If you missed anything, click these links and find these resources. We do have monthly webinars, cohorts, and coaching happening all the time from Lifelong Learning at VTS. You can find us at bit.ly/VTS event. In November, we're going to be hosting another webinar about practicing the way of love in your congregation on November 19th. So that will be our November webinar, and we hope you can join us for that. We also have an Advent Quiet Morning that VTS will be hosting while it is still dark. So a lot of us are figuring out what to do for Advent and Christmas in creative ways as well as retreats. And this will be a really lovely opportunity to join us for that Advent Quiet Morning. And finally, we have office hours that are happening every Thursday. So if you have questions about this, you have questions about other things, it's just an open drop-in Zoom time with staff members of our lifelong learning department. So every Thursday from 1 to 2:30, and you can sign up or register at the web address there. And that's a really fun experience. It's a great kind of open space to brainstorm, think out loud, bounce some ideas off of staff and each other as we're working on things. So thank you all for joining us. Thanks for attending again, with coming to you from Lifelong Learning at VTS, and lots of these and lots of other resources available at eFormation and Building Faith as well. So thank you, Lindsey. Thank you, Rebecca. This was awesome. We really appreciate your expertise and your generosity in sharing your wisdom and time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everybody.